"Sign it, Dad." My daughter slid a single sheet of paper across the bakery counter. At first, I smiled. I honestly believed she was asking me to approve next month's payroll. Instead, I looked down and saw my own name, Walter Bennett. Printed beneath it were the words, "Voluntary Retirement Agreement." I looked back at Emily. She didn't smile. She didn't look nervous. She looked prepared. "We've talked about this," she said quietly. "You've done enough. It's time to let me run the bakery." Around us, customers continued ordering bread. The espresso machine hissed. Fresh cinnamon rolls came out of the oven. To everyone else, it was just another Tuesday morning. To me, it felt like my entire life had stopped. I didn't answer. Instead, I folded the paper in half, placed it back on the counter, and gently pushed it toward her. "I'm not signing that." Emily sighed. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it has to be." "Harder?" I almost laughed. I'd been waking up at 4 every morning for 41 years. I'd worked through fevers, snowstorms, power outages, the recession, even the months after my wife died. But somehow, the hardest day of my life had become this one. The bakery smelled exactly as it had the day we opened. Warm bread, butter, vanilla. For most people, those smells meant breakfast. For me, they meant home. My wife Margaret and I had opened Bennett Bakery in 1983. We didn't have investors. We didn't have wealthy parents. We had one second-hand oven, 2 wooden tables, and more determination than experience. For the first 6 months, business was terrible. Some days we sold only 3 loaves of bread. One rainy afternoon, I told Margaret we should close before we lost everything. She simply smiled, handed me a still warm dinner roll, and said, "People don't fall in love with a bakery in one visit. They fall in love after they realize someone remembers their name." She was right. Every morning, she greeted every customer like an old friend. Children received free cookies. Teachers received coffee when they looked exhausted. If an elderly customer forgot their wallet, we told them to pay next time. That wasn't marketing. That was simply who Margaret was. And somehow, the town noticed. 3 customers became 10. 10 became 50. Soon, Saturday mornings meant lines stretching onto the sidewalk. Emily grew up inside that bakery. She learned to count by stacking bread baskets. She learned fractions while measuring flour. By the time she turned 12, she could decorate birthday cakes better than I could. Margaret loved telling customers, "One day, our daughter will own this place." Every time she said it, Emily smiled. So did I. Because back then, I believed owning the bakery meant protecting everything that made it special. I had no idea. Emily believed owning it meant changing everything. Margaret believed every customer carried a story. She remembered birthdays, favorite pastries, wedding anniversaries, even the names of people's dogs. I'd ask her how she managed to remember so much. She would just smile and say, "When people know you remember them, they'll never forget you." That simple idea became the heart of Bennett Bakery. Years passed. The bakery grew. So did our family. Emily practically lived behind the front counter. She spent afternoons finishing homework at one of the corner tables. When she got older, she learned how to frost cakes, then pies, then pastries. Customers adored her. Many of them watched her grow from a little girl into a confident young woman. When Margaret became sick, Emily stepped in without being asked. She handled invoices, answered phone calls, scheduled deliveries. I was grateful. I truly believed the bakery would stay in safe hands. After Margaret passed away, I buried myself in work. It was easier to knead dough than to sit alone in an empty house. Every morning, I still expected to hear her humming somewhere in the kitchen. Sometimes, I even caught myself turning around, thinking she'd be standing there, laughing at one of my terrible jokes. Grief does strange things. It convinces you that memories are just around the next corner. Emily noticed how much I was struggling. She suggested we modernize the business. Online ordering, home delivery, Digital advertising. I agreed. Most of her ideas were good. Sales increased. New customers arrived every week. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Then, little things began to change. The free cookies we gave every child disappeared. Emily called them an unnecessary expense. The senior discount Margaret had started years earlier was quietly removed. Emily said, "We're running a business, not a charity." Customers didn't complain. But I noticed something. The smiles became smaller. The conversations became shorter. People stopped lingering over coffee. The bakery was making more money. Yet somehow, it felt poorer than ever. And deep down, for the very first time, I began wondering whether my daughter and I were building the same future at all. The change didn't happen overnight. If it had, I probably would have stopped it. Instead, it happened one small decision at a time. Each decision sounded reasonable. Each decision made financial sense. And each decision quietly pushed the bakery farther away from the place Margaret and I had built together. One Monday morning, Emily walked into my office carrying a folder. I found a cheaper supplier. She placed several invoices on my desk. "We'll save almost $30,000 a year." I looked over the paperwork. The numbers were impressive. But one name immediately caught my attention. The butter supplier. We had been buying butter from the same family-owned dairy for nearly 30 years. "They've never missed a delivery," I said. "Our customers know the difference." Emily folded her arms. "Our customers won't notice. They're buying the brand, not the butter." I wanted to argue. Instead, I signed the papers. I told myself, maybe she was right. A month later, she switched flour suppliers, then chocolate, then vanilla. Every new contract promised higher profits. Every contract chipped away at something I couldn't quite explain. One afternoon, Martha quietly handed me a cinnamon roll. "Try it." I took one bite. It looked perfect. It smelled wonderful. But it wasn't ours. The buttery richness was gone. The soft texture Margaret had perfected over decades had disappeared. I didn't need Martha to tell me what had happened. I could taste it. That evening, I walked through the dining area after closing. The chairs were neatly stacked. The coffee machines had been cleaned. Everything looked exactly the way it always had. But it didn't feel the same. I stopped beside the old community bulletin board. For years, local families had pinned birthday announcements, charity events, school fundraisers, and handwritten thank you notes. The board was gone. In its place, Emily had installed a glowing digital advertising screen. It flashed promotions every few seconds. Buy one, get one free. Limited time offers. It was modern, professional, expensive, and somehow, completely lifeless. The next morning, our oldest customer walked through the front door. Mrs. Evelyn Carter. She had been buying bread from us since opening week. She smiled when she saw me. Then her eyes searched the wall behind the counter. "Walter," she asked softly, "where did the community board go?" Before I could answer, Emily stepped forward. "We removed it. It wasn't generating revenue." Mrs. Carter looked surprised. Then she looked at me. She didn't say another word. She picked up her loaf of bread, paid, and quietly walked out. For the first time in 41 years, I watched one of our oldest customers leave, without smiling. That night, I unlocked the office, opened Margaret's notebook once again, and began reading the final page. For the first time in years. For the next 3 days, I told no one about the business card. Not because I was interested in selling the bakery. I wasn't. I had turned down offers before. Some were worth millions. Every single time, my answer had been the same. No. You don't sell your life's work the way you sell an old car. At least, that's what I believed. Still, something about that handwritten message kept bothering me. They hadn't mailed an offer. They hadn't sent lawyers. They had found me personally. That meant someone had been watching the bakery. On Friday afternoon, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved. Normally, I ignored unknown callers. For some reason, this time I answered. "Mr. Bennett?" The voice sounded calm. Professional. "My name is Daniel Foster. I'm with Harrison Foods International." I walked outside before replying. The lunch crowd filled the bakery. Emily was laughing with customers near the register. She looked exactly like the daughter I remembered. For a second, I wondered if I had imagined everything. "What do you want?" I asked. Daniel answered immediately. "We'd like 30 minutes of your time. Nothing more." "I'm not selling." "I know. That's actually why I'm calling." His answer caught me off guard. "What does that mean?" "It means, this meeting isn't about buying your bakery. It's about saving it." The line went silent. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Saving it from what? Daniel hesitated. "I'm afraid that's not a conversation I want to have over the phone." He suggested a small coffee shop across town. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. Before I could answer, he added one final sentence. "And please, don't tell your daughter." The call ended. For several minutes, I simply stood outside the bakery, watching people come and go, watching Emily greet customers, watching the business Margaret and I had built carry on as though nothing was wrong. That evening, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I drove back to the bakery. I still had my own key. The kitchen was dark, quiet, peaceful. I switched on a single light, and walked through every room. The ovens, the mixers, the old wooden shelves, everything looked exactly the same. Then, I noticed something. The office door was slightly open. Emily always locked it before leaving. Slowly, I pushed the door wider. The desk drawers were open. Folders lay scattered across the floor. At first, I thought someone had broken in. Then I saw the security monitor. Every camera inside the bakery had been switched off. My heart started pounding. Someone hadn't come here to steal money. They had come looking for something else. And somehow, I had the feeling they hadn't found it. I locked the front door behind me and stood perfectly still. The bakery was silent, almost too silent. For 41 years, I had walked these floors before sunrise. I knew every sound the building made. The old refrigerator hummed every 30 seconds. The ceiling above the kitchen creaked whenever the temperature dropped. Tonight, none of those sounds comforted me. I stepped into the office. The filing cabinet was unlocked. Every drawer had been pulled open. Invoices covered the floor. Supplier contracts had been tossed aside. Even the employee records had been disturbed. Whoever had searched this room hadn't been looking for cash. They had been looking for paperwork. I bent down and slowly gathered the scattered folders. As I placed them back inside the cabinet, I noticed something strange. One folder was missing. Not an important financial file. Not payroll. Not taxes. It was an old blue folder, labeled simply, "Original Recipes." My heart skipped. Then I remembered. The folder had been empty for years. Margaret and I had removed every handwritten recipe long ago. The real recipes were never kept there. Anyone stealing that folder would walk away with nothing but blank divider sheets. I couldn't help smiling. Whoever searched this office didn't know the bakery nearly as well as they thought. The following morning, I drove to the coffee shop Daniel had mentioned. He was already waiting. Mid-50s. Gray suit. No briefcase. As soon as I sat down, he pushed a thin envelope across the table. "I think you should see this first." Inside were several photographs. The first showed Emily having dinner with two men in business suits. The second showed them standing outside Bennett Bakery. The third stopped me cold. Emily was shaking hands with the owner of the largest bakery chain in the state. I looked up. "What is this?" Daniel folded his hands. "Those meetings have been happening for almost 4 months. They're interested in your location." I frowned. "They've tried buying this building before. They always failed." Daniel nodded. "Because you always said no." He leaned closer. "But someone else may be willing to say yes." A cold feeling settled in my chest. Emily doesn't own the bakery. Not yet. Daniel's answer barely rose above a whisper. "But according to people we've spoken with, she believes she will very soon." I stared through the cafe window. People walked by carrying coffee, laughing, talking, living ordinary lives. Meanwhile, mine had just become anything but ordinary. Before leaving, Daniel handed me one final document. "Take this home. Read it carefully. If it's genuine, your daughter isn't just planning for your retirement. She's planning for your signature." I looked down at the sealed envelope in my hands. For the first time, I was afraid to open it. I didn't open the envelope in the parking lot. I couldn't. Whatever was inside had already changed the way I looked at my own daughter. I wasn't ready for it to change anything else. When I arrived home, I made a pot of coffee, the same way Margaret always had. 2 scoops. A pinch of cinnamon. Nothing fancy. Some habits survive, even after the people who started them are gone. I sat at the kitchen table, and finally opened the envelope. Inside were copies of several documents, emails, meeting schedules, property evaluations. Then I reached the last page. It was a draft contract. Not a completed agreement. Just a proposal. Across the top, I read the title twice. Letter of Intent to Purchase Bennett Bakery. The buyer wasn't Harrison Foods. It was another company. Stonebridge Hospitality Group. I recognized the name immediately. They weren't bakers. They bought historic buildings, turned them into luxury cafes, boutique hotels, and expensive restaurants. The bakery wasn't what they wanted. They wanted the corner property. I kept reading. According to the proposal, the building would be demolished, the ovens removed, the kitchen destroyed. Everything Margaret and I had built would disappear. Then something caught my eye. The seller's name. It didn't say Emily Bennett. It said, "Pending authorization from Walter Bennett." I leaned back in my chair. She couldn't sell the bakery. Not without me. At least, not yet. For the first time in days, I felt a small sense of relief. Then I noticed a handwritten note attached to the contract. Only 4 words. "Retirement solves everything." Suddenly, Emily's insistence made sense. The retirement papers. The pressure. The meetings. The secrecy. If I stepped away, she believed she could convince me to sell. Or worse, convince me to sign something without reading every page. I wasn't angry anymore. I was disappointed. Because somewhere along the way, my daughter had stopped seeing the bakery as a promise. She saw it as an opportunity. The next morning, I arrived at the bakery before anyone else. I unlocked the front door, switched on the lights, and stood quietly in the dining room. Family photographs still covered one wall. Pictures of weddings, birthday cakes, Little League teams we had sponsored decades ago. Customers smiled from every frame. I slowly walked from one photograph to the next. Then I stopped. One frame was missing. It had always hung beside the front register. The picture of Margaret, holding a loaf of bread on opening day. Only the empty hook remained. At that exact moment, Emily walked through the front door carrying her laptop. She smiled as though nothing had happened. I looked at the empty space on the wall, then back at my daughter. and I asked the simplest question I could think of. "Emily, where's your mother's picture?" Emily stopped walking. For just a second, the confident expression on her face disappeared. She looked toward the empty space on the wall, then back at me. I had it taken down. Her answer came so calmly, it almost sounded rehearsed. I frowned. "Why?" She set her laptop on the counter. "We're updating the dining room. The designer said the wall looked cluttered." I looked around. Every photograph was still hanging exactly where it had always been. Except Margaret's. "So the designer only wanted your mother's picture removed?" Emily hesitated. "It wasn't personal. It just didn't fit the new look." Those words hit harder than I expected. Didn't fit. Margaret had spent her entire adult life inside these walls. She had greeted thousands of customers, comforted grieving families, donated food when people couldn't afford groceries. If anyone belonged on that wall, it was her. Before I could answer, the front door opened. Mrs. Evelyn Carter stepped inside. She smiled the moment she saw me. "Oh, Walter. I'm so glad you're here." She walked to the counter and looked around. Almost immediately, her smile faded. "Where's Margaret's picture?" Emily answered before I could. "We're renovating." Mrs. Carter slowly nodded. Then she looked directly at Emily. "I lost my husband 12 years ago. There isn't a single day that I wish people would stop remembering him." The bakery became completely silent. Even the young cashier stopped arranging pastries. No one spoke. Mrs. Carter picked up her loaf of sourdough. She paid, thanked me, and quietly walked out. Emily crossed her arms. "Customers don't understand branding." I stared at her. No. They understand respect. For a long moment, neither of us said another word. Then Martha came rushing out of the kitchen. "Walter, I think you need to see this." She handed me that morning's financial report. I glanced at the first page. Sales were up. Profits were up. Everything looked excellent. Then I turned to the second page. My stomach tightened. Customer visits were down almost 23%. People were spending more, but fewer people were coming back. That wasn't growth. It was the beginning of a decline. I looked at Emily. "Have you seen these numbers?" She barely glanced at the report. "They're temporary. We're attracting higher-paying customers and losing loyal ones." She didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her laptop and walked toward the office. Just before closing the door, her phone rang. She looked at the screen and immediately stepped outside to answer it. I couldn't hear every word. Only one sentence drifted through the open doorway. "Don't worry. He still doesn't suspect anything." My heart sank. Because I knew. She wasn't talking about me. She was talking about someone else. I didn't let Emily know I had hurt her. Instead, I walked back into the kitchen, put on my apron, and started shaping bread dough. For 41 years, whenever life became confusing, I baked. The rhythm calmed me. Mix, fold, wait, repeat. Bread had a way of reminding me that rushing rarely made anything better. Around noon, Carlos arrived with the daily flour delivery. He signed the invoice, then quietly leaned against the back door. "Walter, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Have you hired consultants?" I looked up. "What consultants?" "The people in suits. They've been coming here almost every week. They never buy anything. They just walk around, take notes, and leave." A cold feeling settled over me. "When was the last time you saw them?" Carlos thought for a moment. "Yesterday. They were measuring the parking lot. Measuring. Not admiring the bakery. Not tasting the bread. Measuring. That afternoon, I decided to find out for myself. Instead of driving home, I parked across the street after closing. From inside my truck, I had a clear view of the front entrance. At 6:48, Emily locked the doors. The employees waved goodbye and drove away. Only Emily remained inside. 7 minutes later, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. A tall man stepped out. Gray hair. Dark coat. Leather briefcase. Emily opened the front door before he even knocked. She was expecting him. The two disappeared into the office. The lights stayed on for nearly an hour. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see enough through the office window. Blueprints. Documents. Several times, the man pointed toward the dining room, then toward the kitchen. Finally, he unfolded what looked like architectural drawings. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. No bakery owner needs blueprints, unless they're planning to change the building itself. At exactly 8 o'clock, the office door opened. Emily walked the man outside. They shook hands. Then, something unexpected happened. The man handed Emily a thick envelope. She looked around the empty parking lot, before slipping it into her handbag. My stomach turned. Whatever was happening, it had gone far beyond casual business meetings. The SUV pulled away. Emily locked the bakery once again, and drove home. I waited another 5 minutes, just to be certain no one returned. Then I crossed the street. As I reached the sidewalk, something caught my eye near the curb. A single sheet of paper was lying beneath a parked car. It must have slipped from the man's briefcase. I picked it up. Across the top, in bold letters, were 3 words that made my pulse race. Demolition Phase 1. In that moment, every doubt disappeared. Someone wasn't planning to renovate Bennett Bakery. They were planning to erase it completely. I read the page again. Then a third time. There was no misunderstanding. Across the bottom, someone had written today's date. This wasn't an old proposal. It was active. I folded the paper carefully, slipped it inside my jacket, and drove home in complete silence. Sleep never came. Instead, I sat in Margaret's old rocking chair, watching the sunrise through the living room window. For years, I had convinced myself that every problem could be solved with patience. Talk long enough, listen carefully enough, and eventually people found common ground. But this felt different. Someone had already made plans. Detailed plans. Plans that didn't include asking me. At 8 o'clock, I called Daniel Foster. He answered immediately. "You found something." "How did you know?" "Because you're calling. I assumed you wouldn't unless it mattered." I told him about the blueprint, the envelope, the late-night meeting, and the document labeled Demolition Phase 1. Daniel didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he let out a slow breath. "I'm afraid it's worse than I thought." "Worse how?" "They're moving much faster than expected. They usually don't prepare demolition plans until the purchase is almost guaranteed." Almost guaranteed. Those 2 words echoed in my mind. "But they still need my signature." "They do." Daniel paused. "Unless..." He stopped speaking. "Unless what?" "Unless they believe they can convince you. Or trick you." After ending the call, I drove straight to the bakery. Emily was already there. She smiled as I walked in. "Morning, Dad." Her smile looked genuine. That was the hardest part. I couldn't tell anymore which version of my daughter was real. The little girl who used to hand out free cookies, or the businesswoman holding secret meetings after closing. Late that afternoon, our accountant, Richard, arrived for the monthly review. Richard had worked with our family for nearly 25 years. He knew every dollar that entered or left the bakery. As Emily stepped away to answer another phone call, Richard quietly slid a folder toward me. "Walter," he whispered, "I think you should look at page 14. I opened the folder beneath the counter. There, hidden among dozens of ordinary expenses, was a payment I didn't recognize. Consulting services. $280,000. My eyes widened. "We've never hired consultants." Richard slowly shook his head. "No, you haven't." He leaned closer. "But someone has." I looked toward Emily's office. The door was closed. She was still on the phone. And for the first time, I realized, the answers I needed might already be hidden inside my own financial records. I waited until closing time, not because I was afraid of the truth, but because I wanted to hear it, without customers watching. The last family left just after 6. Martha locked the kitchen. Carlos loaded the final delivery crate into his truck. One by one, the lights went dark. Soon, only Emily and I remained. She looked up from her laptop. "Long day?" I nodded. "It has been." I closed the office door behind me. Emily immediately noticed. "Dad? Is something wrong?" I placed Richard's financial report on the desk. Then I laid the demolition document beside it. Finally, I set Daniel's photographs on top. Emily's expression changed. Not panic. Recognition. She knew exactly what she was looking at. "You've been following me." Her voice was calm. "I've been trying to understand you." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she slowly pushed the papers aside. "You don't understand the situation." "Then explain it." She stood and walked toward the window. "You think this bakery is thriving. It isn't. The equipment is aging. The roof needs replacing. The ovens waste thousands of dollars every year. And the property taxes have nearly doubled." I listened quietly. She wasn't lying. Those problems were real. But none of that explains demolition plans. Emily turned toward me. "They offered $18 million. The number hung in the room. 18 million. More money than Margaret and I could have imagined when we opened the bakery. They said we'd never have to worry again. They said we could retire. They said the employees would receive generous severance packages." "And you believed them?" "They showed me the contracts. They showed me projections. They showed me numbers." I slowly shook my head. "They showed you everything. Except what this place actually means." Emily looked away. For the first time, I saw doubt in her eyes. I walked over to the bookshelf in the corner. On the very top shelf, covered in a thin layer of flour dust, sat an old wooden recipe box. I carried it to the desk and placed it in front of her. She frowned. "I've never seen that before." "I know. Your mother hid it here 20 years ago." Emily carefully lifted the lid. Inside, there were no recipes, only hundreds of handwritten index cards. Every card carried a customer's name, birthdays, favorite pastries, allergies, wedding anniversaries, personal notes. Margaret had written every single one herself. I picked up the first card. Evelyn Carter. Lemon loaf every Friday. Lost her husband. Always ask about her grandson. I looked back at Emily. This was the real recipe. And once you forget it, you don't own a bakery anymore. You just own a building. Emily stared at the index cards without saying a word. One by one, she picked them up, Each card held a name, a memory, a life. There were hundreds of them. Mrs. Carter. Chocolate croissants every Sunday. Extra flaky. Never charge for the second one. Jacob Miller. Nut allergy. Always prepare his birthday cake before anyone else's. Officer Daniels. Leaves for the night shift at 7. Keep a hot coffee ready during winter. Emily slowly lowered the cards. I never knew these existed. I smiled sadly. They weren't meant to be hidden forever. They were meant to be earned. Before Emily could answer, someone knocked on the office door. 3 quick knocks. Confident. Almost impatient. Emily looked surprised. Were you expecting someone? She slowly shook her head. I opened the door. Standing outside was the gray-haired man I had seen leaving the bakery days earlier. He smiled politely. Good evening. My name is Victor Lang. I believe we've been trying to reach an agreement. Emily's face immediately tightened. Victor. This isn't a good time. He ignored her. Instead, he looked directly at me. Mr. Bennett. I'm sure your daughter has explained the opportunity. I've explained nothing. His smile faded. For the first time, his polished confidence cracked. I see. He stepped into the office anyway. I'll save everyone some time. He opened his briefcase and placed a thick contract on the desk. $18 million. Paid immediately. No financing. No delays. You sign. We close within 30 days. I looked at the contract, but never touched it. Victor continued speaking. The building is outdated. The neighborhood is changing. Within 5 years, this property will be worth less than we're offering today. He leaned closer. This is your chance to leave with dignity. I couldn't help smiling. Dignity? I pointed toward the dining room. You walked through that bakery. You measured the walls. You counted parking spaces. But you never asked a single customer why they keep coming back. Victor folded his arms. I'm offering business. You're talking about emotions. No. I'm talking about value. $18 million buys a building. It doesn't buy 41 years of trust. It doesn't buy my wife's legacy. And it certainly doesn't buy my signature. The room fell silent. Victor slowly closed the briefcase. Then, he looked at Emily. I thought you said he'd eventually agree. Emily's eyes widened. She looked from Victor to me, and back again. For the first time, she realized she hadn't been negotiating. She had been manipulated. Victor's confidence vanished. For the first time since walking into the bakery, he looked uncomfortable. Emily stared at him. You told me this was about saving the bakery. Victor sighed. It was about maximizing the value of the property. That's not what you promised. He straightened his jacket. Miss Bennett, I promised you financial security. I never promised the bakery would remain exactly as it is. Emily looked as though someone had knocked the air out of her lungs. You said the business would continue. It will. Victor shrugged. Just under a different brand. A modern concept. Higher margins. Better investors. I watched my daughter's expression change. The confidence. The certainty. The excitement. All disappeared. In their place, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Regret. Victor picked up his briefcase. I'll give both of you a few days. When emotions settle, you'll realize this is the only sensible decision. He reached for the office door. Actually, I don't think I will. Victor turned around. I pulled a folded document from my jacket pocket. It wasn't one of his contracts. It was a single sheet. Signed 6 years earlier. Margaret's signature appeared at the bottom. Emily frowned. "What is that?" "It's something your mother insisted we prepare. After she became sick." I handed the document to Emily. She read silently. Then her eyes widened. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a trust. It was the bakery's ownership agreement. Margaret and I had written one condition into it. If either owner believed the bakery would lose its original purpose, ownership could never be transferred, sold, or redeveloped, without unanimous written approval from an independent board of trustees. Emily looked up. "There are trustees?" I nodded. 5 of them. They've existed for years. Victor frowned. "That's impossible. No one mentioned a board." "Because no one asked." I smiled calmly. Margaret believed businesses change. People change. Even families change. So she created one final safeguard. Victor quickly flipped through the agreement. The color drained from his face. "This clause makes the property practically impossible to acquire." It wasn't designed to stop buyers. It was designed to stop people from forgetting why the bakery existed. Victor quietly closed the folder. For the first time, he had nothing left to say. Without another word, he walked out of the office. The front door opened, then closed. Silence filled the bakery once again. Emily remained standing beside the desk, still holding the agreement in trembling hands. Finally, she whispered the one question I had been waiting to hear. "Dad, do you think Mom knew that something like this might happen someday?" I looked at the photograph hanging above the office door. It was the very first picture ever taken inside Bennett Bakery. Margaret stood behind the counter, covered in flour, laughing because I had accidentally burned the first batch of rolls. She always said, "People won't remember perfect bread. They'll remember how you made them feel." Emily slowly sat down. Tears filled her eyes. "I thought I was protecting you." I stayed quiet. "They kept telling me you were exhausted. They said you deserved to retire. They said the bakery would never survive another 10 years without millions in renovations." She wiped her face. "And every time I hesitated, they reminded me how much money we were turning down." I nodded slowly. "That's how people like Victor work. They don't begin with greed. They begin with fear. They convince good people that they have no other choice." Emily lowered her head. "I'm sorry." Not the quick apology people give, just to end an argument. This one was different. It came from somewhere much deeper. I stopped listening. I stopped talking to customers. I stopped asking what Mom would have done. I only looked at numbers. I walked around the desk and sat beside her. Numbers matter. We have bills. We have repairs. We have employees depending on us. But numbers should guide decisions. They should never replace people. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Emily opened the old recipe box again. She picked up Mrs. Carter's card. Then Officer Daniels. Then dozens more. "I want to learn all of these." I smiled. "It'll take years." "I know. I'm not in a hurry anymore." The next morning, before sunrise, Emily arrived carrying a hammer. Without saying a word, she walked to the dining room wall. She carefully rehung Margaret's photograph, exactly where it had been for decades. Then she gathered the staff together. "Martha, I owe you an apology. Carlos, I'm bringing back the local suppliers. And starting today, every child gets a free cookie again." Martha smiled through tears. Carlos laughed. The young cashier clapped before anyone else did. Just as we unlocked the front door, Mrs. Evelyn Carter walked in. She stopped the moment she saw Margaret's picture. A gentle smile spread across her face. She looked at Emily, then quietly said, Welcome back. Emily's eyes filled with tears once again. But this time, they weren't tears of regret. They were the tears of someone finally finding her way home. 6 months later, I arrived at the bakery before sunrise. Some habits never leave you. The ovens were already warm. Fresh bread filled the air. And for the first time in a very long while, I wasn't the first person inside. Emily stood behind the workbench, rolling out pie dough. Her apron was dusted with flour. A strand of hair had slipped loose from beneath her cap. She looked up and smiled. "Morning, Dad." Without thinking, she reached for one of the old index cards. "Mrs. Carter's coming in today. Extra lemon glaze." I smiled. She didn't need the card anymore. She simply liked keeping it nearby. The bakery had changed. Not because expensive renovations had transformed it. Because the people inside had. The free cookie jar had returned. Local farmers once again supplied our flour, eggs, and fruit. The community bulletin board was full of school events, charity dinners, and handwritten thank you notes. Business was better than it had been in years. Not because prices had increased. Because customers had. That afternoon, a young couple walked through the front door. They had just moved into town. The woman looked around the bakery, then smiled. "We've heard this is the place everyone recommends." Before I could answer, Emily stepped forward. She welcomed them by name. She had already memorized it from their catering inquiry the week before. As I watched her, I heard Margaret's voice in my memory. "Teach her to remember people, and the recipes will take care of themselves." I finally understood. Margaret hadn't left us a bakery. She had left us a responsibility. Buildings grow old. Ovens wear out. Even recipes can change. But kindness, if it's passed from one generation to the next, never expires. As I locked the front door that evening, I looked one last time at Margaret's photograph. Then I smiled. Because I realized something. The greatest thing we ever baked wasn't bread. It was trust. And unlike a loaf of bread, trust only grows when you share it. The bakery lights faded into the evening. But Margaret's recipe would never fade at all.